Hello, here we are again. Welcome to my podcast and my YouTube channel. Today, we're going to talk about something that is important to every single one of us. For my listeners, for me, for anyone who wants to listen. We're talking about designing your life. And we're going to have as a guest the co-author of the book, Designing Your Life, How to Build a Well-Lived, Joyful Life, Dave Evans. He wrote the book with Bill Burnett. They co-founded the Stanford Life Design Lab, where they teach one of the most popular classes there. Um, I really was impressed with your book, Dave, you and Bill, because I kept going back. It's one of those books that you read and you go back and say, did I get that right? And then you go forward and then go back again because it's so interesting. And I think it's so relevant to my audience. As I told you, we exchanged a few emails before. I have two main audiences. One are the people who are struggling with suicide ideation. They're going through life crisis. And the other one are people who are grieving the loss of a loved one's suicide. So not only is Dave the co-author of that book, but I think even more important to us and to my audience, he also has been touched by suicide. His father took his life when he was very young, 9 years old, right?
Yep.
And your father was 49, so very young. So he
Yeah.
knows about suicide and everything that we're going to talk about today. We're going to go back to this idea on designing your life and how can you apply that to times of crisis. So it can be either the loss of a loved one to suicide, which is something he knows. And he also, I'm so sorry about your loss, Dave. He also very recently lost his wife. So we're going to be transitioning between all the themes of the book. I love your book. Thank you so much for being here. Some of the topics that we're going to be covered today, just so my listeners know, is what is, because he talks about a well-lived life. What is that? What does that even mean? How can you design it? Because many times, especially when you're in crisis, you don't believe you can. You're stuck, right? How to get unstuck from that crisis. We're going to talk about something that is kind of the umbrella of the book, dysfunctional beliefs, things that gets us stuck in life and keeps us from moving forward, how to reframe these dysfunctional beliefs. We're going to talk about the myth of creating the perfect job. It doesn't sound like it fits, but it does, because most of our lives that's what we spend doing. So we have to talk about that. We're going to talk about creativity, and we're going to talk about the many lives we have. And at the end, we're going to talk about failure. Who doesn't know that, right, Dave? Thank you so much for being here with us.
I'm glad to be here, Paul. It's really great. And I guess if we're going to cover all that, we're going to have to talk pretty fast because that's a lot of material.
I know. Well, I
So where do
know,
you want
but
to
that's
start?
what I can. It was, I had a hard time putting this together because your book talks about so many things and wonderful things. And we only have like 50 minutes, 45, 50 minutes. My goodness. Okay, I won't talk about this, but this is so important. So let's just start. Let's start by
Right.
well-lived life. That's the title of your
Right.
book. What does that even mean?
Well, first of all, if you look at the tagline, it says, designing your life, how to build the well-lived, joyful life. So first of all, there's a hint, that where Bill and Dave coming from, that we threw joyful in there.
Mm-hmm.
We try very hard not to answer the questions about what a good life is for you, because that's up to you. In fact, probably one of the Amazon book reviews we liked the best, one of the earliest ones we got, was somebody said, well, clearly these authors respect the autonomy of the reader, because they're
Wow.
telling you how to figure it out, and they're not trying to tell you what the answer is. So we're pretty committed to not shooting on people. I don't want to shoot on you. We don't recommend you shoot on yourself. And so what is well lived actually is up to you. Now, we make some suggestions there. We talk in the book about, and this is very important to both Bill and me, living the coherent life. We call the coherent life where who I am, what I believe, and what I'm doing with my life are in alignment. They're philosophically and ideologically and value-based, consistent one to the other. Like, I don't want to wake up at 2 in the morning, like one of my clients did years ago, and called me at 2 in the morning because this happened to her. And she went into the bathroom, flipped on the bathroom light, looked in the mirror, and said, I hate my life. How did you get us here? She's yelling at herself in the mirror, like, what were you thinking? This is not who I want to be. And a lot of people have that experience, so you don't want to have that experience. You want to be able to, wake up at 3 a.m, kind of go, this is great. This is exactly who I am. I'm doing exactly what I want to be doing, or as close to it as the world will let me do at this time. None of us gets the exact right thing. Life is full of compromise. It's just, is it a compromise that's manageable for you at this time?
Yeah, and one of the things that I found that was very important in your book is not creating. It's not about creating a new life per se, but code is redesigning the life you have, right? Because we often think about this. Oh, I need a new life. No, there is good in your life. You don't have to erase it all and start from scratch.
Yeah, it's interesting because we've now written about to be 2.5 books. We wrote the first book in 2016, Designing Your Life, the one we're primarily talking about today, which is the one that went nuts all over the world in 23 languages. We wrote a second book that came out February 25th of last year, a week before my wife was terminally diagnosed with cancer and 9 days before shelter in place with COVID started here in California. So the book got crushed by COVID, but it got great critical reviews. It was called Designing Your Work Life. And the reason we wrote Designing Your Work Life was Penguin and Knopf, our publishers, said, we've heard from a lot of people just what you said. I would like my life to be a little bit better. I don't think I want to completely reinvent myself. I don't want to jump out of the airplane with my parachute on and start all over. I can't afford to do that, or I don't want to do that. But I would like to redesign my existing life a little bit. And if I had to pick one place to do it, I'd probably do it at work, because that's where I spend most of the time. And 69% of US workers and 85% worldwide of working people are disengaged at work. Work's kind of boring. It's not really working for them. So we said that's kind of a crisis. We should work on that. But yes, we absolutely want to help people make even very small moves. One of our bylines is set the bar low and clear it. Make little incremental moves and slowly evolve a better life. You don't have to make some big dramatic shift. It's surprising what huge psychic benefits you can get from small structural changes.
Mm-hmm. Can you give us an example from students or from what you've seen of these small structural changes?
Sure. There's a thing actually it's in the new book called what we call the maker mix. So people often say, well, hey, what do you make? Paula, you used to be a journalist and now you're going on to becoming a therapist. What do you make? And they usually mean money. How much money do you make? Well, money's one thing people make in the world, but that's only one economy. That's the market economy. Then there's also, we're all also, people who make a difference in the world. There's social entrepreneurs and social impact. So you make money, by doing something, and you make an impact in the world by the way you live your life, and you also express yourself creatively. When we ask people, what else would you like to be doing more of? They often say, well, I'd like to be more creative, whether they're a professional artist or not. And so the truth is, all of us do all of those things. We all, have some involvement in the world, for money, or maybe it's even a nonprofit. So we make, productivity or money, we make impact, and we make creativity expressions. So my wife, Claudia, about a year before she died, about 2 years before she died, had pivoted her career from the money-making world and the high-profit Silicon Valley stuff that she'd done for 35 years to working on solving homelessness. So she had dropped making money. Money making was very low on purpose. She worked a little bit on the side for her brother's company to get insurance. She will work for medical insurance. And then she spent a lot of time solving homelessness here in the central coast of California. But she wasn't as creative as she wanted to be. So she had thought about being a watercolor artist years before, had tried it a little tiny bit, didn't get very far, and said, well, let me try that. I know I'll just take a class. Mm-hmm. And the class was an hour and a half a week. So she signed up for the introduction to watercolor class, hour and a half a week. I mean, a very small percentage of her time and energy. And within 3 weeks, it was transformative, because, wow, I love doing this, and it's animating a whole nother part of my brain, and my hands love doing this, and look at this cool thing. She actually turned out to be incredibly talented very quickly, really annoyed all the other people in the class because I looked like she was the ringer,
sure.
because she was making this amazing stuff. The teacher kept holding up her example as the way to do it. But she had, and it wasn't a lot of time. Just a little move with a huge return. And there are all kinds of things that fit that category.
Hmm. And you and Bill, you talk about having the designer mindset, and that's very
Yes.
important to change in your life, to making that pivot, right?
Right.
What is so special about the designer's mindset?
Well, we talk about this a lot, we mentioned five. Actually, added one more, made it six mindsets in the second book. So those mindsets are, first and foremost, curiosity, coming from curiosity. Leaning into what we call latent wonderfulness. Everything in the universe is interesting if you looked at it from the point of view of the people that knew it was really cool. There's people who do that for people who live in that city and like it. It's their hometown. You think, oh, I'm going to go to Cincinnati. Who wants to go to Cincinnati? Well, hey, if you went to
I'm
somebody
sure
who
there are
grew up in
people.
Cincinnati and loves it and said, what do you love about Cincinnati? They will tell you. So you have to understand someone likes it. Somebody's doing this. Oh, an insurance company. How boring is that? Well, there's 10,000 people in that company over there. At least 50 of them are having a great time. What do they know that you don't? So curiosity leans into the possibility that something's there to be found. Then I'm going to be a radical. So number one, curiosity. Number two, radical collaboration. I'm not in this alone. And radical doesn't mean radicalism. It just means radically inclusive. I'm going to talk to and hear from all points of view. If I do that, I'm going to probably end up realizing I don't have it all figured out. I'm going to reframe. I'm going to have a new point of view. So reframing is crucial. How you look at things has everything to do with what you think you're working on and what you could possibly do. Then, as a radical collaborator, you want to have a bias toward action. When in doubt, do stuff. Be mindful of your process. Know where you are. Designers talk about flair and focus. When am I going wide and having lots of ideas and making no judgments at all? And when am I focusing and being critical and actually paring things away and getting stuff done? Ideating and implementing are very, very different. You know,
Mhm.
um, and last is storytelling. As you go along this process, which is iterative and collaborative, you're telling the story of what you're learning. You're telling the story of what questions are coming up for you. And that creates the invitational space for other people to collaborate with you. So those are the
Okay.
mindsets. And all of that together really is driven by curiosity and an openness to, I don't have the answers, but the world and the other people I can work with do. And if we work together, we can find something. So there's a fundamental optimism in design that my openness, my energy, and my collaboration will eventually be productive and successful.
Okay. You talked about reframing, and as I said before, this is one of the main ideas of the book, right?
Right,
What dysfunctional belief do you have, and how can you reframe it? And when I think about my audience, Dave, I
right,
think about those who are struggling. They have a lot of dysfunctional beliefs. I'm not good enough. I never will be good enough. I
right,
can't do this. And also the ones who are grieving, they believe that they will never be happy again because they lost a loved one to
right,
suicide, or they believe that they're guilty of their death, or they could have
right.
done something different. And you've had this experience. You're
Yeah,
also grieving right now
yep.
as we speak. It's a very recent loss of your wife. So can you talk about how you take this, all these things that you teach to your students, and you apply it to your own life?
Yeah,
And,
it's a
and
very
also tell, sorry, but also tell my audience, how can they apply it to theirs?
sure. Well, first of all, I want to respect. I mean, having lost my father to suicide, having just about 6.5 months ago to the yesterday would have been my wife's 71st birthday. So she didn't have one because she's not here. She died on December 4th. And after 9 months, she had sure, her prognosis varied from 5 months to 24, depending on how the chemo was going, but it ended up being 9. And we did it, and she died very well. We did a really good job on dying, but it
Mhm.
sucks. So I'm
So,
deep in that grief process. I've been writing about it, working on it really hard, reading about it, reframing like crazy.
mhm,
And I invested deeply in figuring out what the hell happened to my dad. Now, first of all, the first reframe on my father's death, I was 9 years old. I'm the baby of three children. I have 3-year older twin sisters. So two 12-year-old girls and one little 9-year-old boy, and a
mhm,
woman suddenly lost the man of the house. And we did not know it was suicide until we got well into our 20s. My mother
mhm.
decided that her children did not deserve to grow up thinking that their father didn't think they were worth living for.
Wow.
So she created an incredible net of secrecy around that, which was impenetrable. She was very successful at doing that. Everybody knew the story except us. And then in our 20s and early 30s, we began to figure it out. And I started working that through, so the first reframe was it wasn't suicide. And I think a lot of suicides are reframed with lies. There are
Yes,
lies
very
told
much so.
around the suicide to manage the incredible shame of that story. And
Mhm.
sometimes those lies are trying to do the right thing. In retrospect, for a long time, I was really mad at my mother for doing that. Like, you lied to us, you denied us the ability to actually process the reality of what happened in our lives. And in retrospect, now having been a parent and now a grandparent, I've got 9 grandchildren. I'm not sure a 9-year-old boy does need to carry all that weight. So I think there was a
So you
kindness in it.
reframe that too.
Yeah. So first of all, she reframed it, and then when I figured it out, I reacted to it negatively, and then I reframed that as a kindness. So these things change over time, and then once I got that far along, I spent, at one point, a counselor I was working with in fact, it was funny. I was sitting at breakfast one morning. This is kind of a long story, but this is where your
Yeah.
listeners are. I'm probably in my mid-late 30s. And I'm having breakfast with a guy named Rich, another CEO of a company. I was a management consultant at the time, good friend of mine. And he looks at me, and out of nowhere, it has nothing to do with the conversation we're having. He just looks at me and goes, "Dave, I just need to tell you, when I look at you, I just see a huge lake of pain, and I think you need to go drain it."
Wow.
Then he sits down, and it was, out of nowhere. And my immediate thought was one of two things. I mean, not to be unkind, but yeah, Rich, you're either full of shit, or you're dead right. Because what you just said makes no sense to me at all, which means either you're just wrong and you're totally out of line, or you're right and I am so defended against it, I don't even know what you're talking about, and I better drain that lake because apparently it's ruining my life. Now, I'm a happy, cheerful, successful person. I'm married, I got a couple of kids. So I said, I got nothing to lose here by checking this out. So I go, I'll hire a counselor. So,
Well,
right.
but again, I'm sorry to interrupt, but again,
Yeah.
it's your open mind, right? And that's what you
Yeah.
have to do to design your life.
Part of being a designer is I don't know everything.
Yeah.
And a lot of this has to do with what's your anthropology. What do you believe is true of the human person? My definition of a human person is we are all a becoming.
Yeah.
You're a growing entity. If you're going to get better, which means you used to be worse. Like, oh, I should have done it differently. Of course you should have done it differently. I mean, there is nothing that my 68-year-old self wouldn't do differently than my 38-year-old self. I'm way better at living than I was 30 years ago. Of course I would do everything differently because I'm supposed to learn from it. That doesn't mean you did it wrong. It means you did it as well as you could at the time.
Yes.
Right. So at the time, at 38, maybe I'm ready to find out that I'm dragging a lake of pain around unconsciously, and I believe in learning. This guy's older than me. He might know something I don't know. I'm not offended by that. I mean, he loves me enough to say this incredibly rude thing to me. That's an act of immense. He's willing to risk me flipping him off and walking away and never talking to him.
Did he tell you, I mean, what made him, I mean, I'm just thinking about with the mind of a
where'd that come
therapist.
from?
Where did that come from? I mean,
Well,
what was the spark for him that said, you're so happy. You're this very accomplished guy. You don't fool me.
Well, I happen to be a very religious person, and he and I had been in a study and prayer group together for years. I mean, getting up early on Thursday mornings, and we'd have a study and prayer group, and then we'd go off to breakfast together. So we'd been around each other for years. And Rich, the particular guy I'm talking about, is a strange duck. So the short answer, what exactly did he look at? I don't know. I could still call him today. That was 20 years ago, 30 years ago, and say, Rich, what were you thinking? And he would probably say, well, that's just what it seemed like to me. It just seemed like what you needed to hear. That's the best answer he'd come up with. But it's good to have some of those people in your life. I'm always looking to have people pour into my life. This weekend, I'm getting together with 3 young men who are 20 years my junior that I started taking out backpacking when they were in high school and college. We're still hanging out together 25 years later. And so, find people who can build into you and you can build into them. That's how we get through this thing. If you're thinking about suicide, you're thinking about yourself alone. And if you're stuck on the grieving of suicide loss, you're stuck in a box by yourself. You're never going to get out by yourself. So the first thing you got to reframe is, and what I want to get to is, I think this counselor that I went to talk to after I discovered I had a lake of pain, we talked for a while and he finally says, you need to go get your father's story. I said, I think I've already worked there pretty hard. I think I got all that. He says, no, you're not even close.
No, you don't.
And I said, okay, that's going to be hard to do because it's secrecy. My family's in California. because it turns out my grandfather embezzled a bunch of banks back in Michigan and got kicked out of the state. There's a bunch of secrets back there. And it's going to be really hard to get the rest of the story. I'm not sure I can even do it. He says, you got to go do it. And I go, okay, what do I get? What do I get if I get this story about my father's suicide? He says, you're going to settle down. Because right now you don't
Wow.
come from
You're going to
anyone.
breathe,
You're going to
right?
breathe. You don't know who you are. You don't know what your story is.
Yeah.
We're all a story. We come from a story, and you got to get there. You just got to get your story.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I can't. It takes quite a while to unpack all what happened in the next 5 or 6 years. But I spent a bunch of time and a bunch of money, frankly, chasing my father's story down.
Wow.
And let me jump to the end of that. So the frame, as best I can put it together, and I don't have it perfectly, but I'm pretty confident that my dad's story, who was a brilliant physicist, he was asked to work on the atomic bomb by Oppenheimer, and he didn't want to work on the
Wow.
bomb. So they made him work on underwater sonar stuff for the Navy instead, which he felt okay about doing. He was a very, very passionate person. He was brilliant, had polio as a child, so he walked with a limp. You know, his family had been run out of Michigan when he was a teenager because suddenly his father, who was the most beloved man in the small town and ran 5 banks in the north regions of Michigan, was found to be embezzling things right and left. And they suddenly went from being rich to being poor, and from being well
Wow.
regarded to being hated. And they were run out of town, and they ended up in a tiny little house in Chinatown in downtown LA. So he literally had this fall from grace and had this, you know, it was all the shame that goes with that. And then it turns out, you know, he was a closet alcoholic, which nobody knew because he did it very quietly, you know, and which my mother found out after they got married and had already had twin girls. And that was not okay with her. She was not a forgiving woman. She's wonderful, she's loving, she's very competent, but she was not particularly forgiving. So it's pretty clear that my mother rejected my dad while they were married, but they already had a family. So they had twin beds.
Oh.
And it was clear from the letters that he had written to her, that we found in a box years later, that my dad was madly in love with my mother. And I'm pretty
Oh.
sure that she rejected him in the marriage.
So
And
that
there's
just added to the pain. Yeah.
often been said there's no lonely like lonely and married. I mean, he was about 18 inches away from something he couldn't have for year in and year out. So that, I think, contributed to a bunch of things, including alcoholism, that in a closet behavior, and he felt terribly trapped. So he was trapped in a dead end job. He got trapped in a marriage. He got trapped in his alcoholism, and I'm pretty sure he believed he was trapped at the bottom of a tube and there was nowhere to go but down.
Wow.
Um,
Makes sense.
and so so he, like almost every other suicide victim, I'm sure, frames, I'm in intolerable pain and there's no way out.
Mm-hmm.
So the only way out is down.
Couldn't redesign his life, huh?
Did not believe he could redesign his life.
Yeah.
Now, the truth is he could have. Now, it would have been harder because this is in the 60s. He killed himself in 1962 when he was 49 years old. You know, and then it was not okay to be an alcoholic. And then it was not okay, you know, to be underemployed. So I think he had heard dysfunctional belief answers to the questions, what am I allowed to do? What is socially tolerable? Now, the absolute truth is, you know, he could have accepted that his wife had rejected him. He could have gotten divorced. He could have gotten remarried. He could have, you know, still been a great dad. There are lots of ways he could have lived that were not what he chose to do. And so I had to both get his story to understand his suicide.
Yes.
Which helped me to accept the decision that he made. I have a logic that puts together trying to be him, and with that handful of barbiturates that he took, you know, and why he swallowed them.
Yeah.
And I've come up with a story that makes coherent sense.
Yes.
Now, it's still then a terrible decision. And this is a critical thing we talk with people in life design about all the time. Don't confuse acceptance with endorsement.
That's a great point. Yes.
Acceptance means I'm willing to live in reality. Endorsement means it was a good idea and it was okay with me. When I was actually more like about 42, I was literally driving down the road about 5 blocks away from my home, And out of nowhere, it hit me like a ton of bricks. Suddenly, the thought comes to my mind, it was right now.
Mm.
And I literally didn't understand what I heard. I was like, God speaking to me. And I'm still driving, and it goes, it was right now. And I suddenly realized what it meant. What it meant is, in
The
my
age?
life right now is exactly when my father killed himself.
Yeah,
I
the
was hit
age.
so hard, I burst into tears. I had to pull the car off to the side of the
Wow.
road. Because at that point, I had 3 children, no twins, but my kids were at that point, 6 to 12 years old. They were the same ages we would have been. I was in the midst of my career, and I thought, and I pulled over and I said, okay, so right now, at this very moment in my life, my early 40s, I got these 3 kids, I got this whole busy life. It is so painful. I think the only thing I can do is kill myself. And 2 thoughts came to mind. Number 1, wow, that's a lot of pain. And number 2,
Wow.
bad move, Dad. Really,
Bad,
really
yeah.
bad move. Because what you chose to ignore was so costly. And so I fully accepted his suicide
Mm-hmm.
and totally reject it
Yeah.
as
So
that
didn't
doesn't mean it's
endorse
not
it.
understandable, but it's not okay. So and I think people trying to move on from suicide get really stuck. That if I accept it, then I say it's okay. No, it's not okay. It
Oh,
has
no,
nothing to
it's not
do with
okay.
okay, but it's true. So
Mm-hmm.
that acceptance frees you, and that non-endorsement keeps you ethically whole as a person. You still have to be you. You have to be an authentic version of you. And you don't want to be stuck between, well, to be an authentic person of me, I have to reject my father. No, you can accept his decision. You can love him and still say bad move. So
Yep.
that getting to that. So acceptance is a huge word. Um, and the only way to get through these losses onto the other side generatively, before we started recording, we talked about, I both think highly of David Kessler's work on the 6th stage of grief is meaning making. To get to meaning making, you've got to get
To
through that
under,
acceptance.
you
And
have to,
acceptance
and you
isn't
have to
enough.
understand, and that's why I chose the name for my podcast, Understand Suicide, because I know the power and the value of understanding where the person was when they took their lives. And as you said with your example, same thing happened to me after my dad's. Even though back then we were very close, I know what was going on, all the problems we was going through, but suicide is not something that just sinks in like that. So
Right.
I went, like you, I started interviewing people who knew him, and I found secrets that
Oh,
really
yeah.
really shocked me. I'm sure it happened to you.
Yeah.
And things like my grandfather, for example. The story my father always told us and what I believed in was that he died when my father was 12 years old. I had actually met my grandfather and I didn't know it because I was like, I don't know, 1 year old or so. He was already married with kids when he died. So things like that I found out by interviewing people, but it gave me the trail to
Yes.
his pain.
Yes.
Why was he so ashamed of his father that he had to kill him for us so we wouldn't even bring it up?
Right.
So after I understood a lot of things about his life, I was just connecting his suicide to financial problems, things that
Right.
were happening at that point in his life,
Right.
a new marriage that came with a lot of responsibility. No, that's not it. So I was able to go back and put together the storyline. And it does come, understanding is powerful. I often talk about this
Right.
on my podcast. Understand, as you said, it doesn't mean you say it's okay. You're not endorsing the suicide,
No.
but it gives you, and as your friend said, and he's very wise to have said it, that there is this sense of, okay, now I can be myself,
Right.
fully myself. I understand, don't endorse it, but
Right.
I can move on, and it's a weight off your shoulder.
Yeah.
After I wrote the book about my father and his story, and I finished the whole thing, it was like a weight off my shoulder. I could understand it. I still felt very bad that he made that decision. He could
Yes.
have made another decision, but it changes everything. To me, it did. And, and
So
and
on
my
the
question to you is,
yeah.
could you breathe afterwards?
Oh yes, I remember vividly. Again, I was trying to get the story, trying to get the story, trying to get the story. And I finally found a man who had been a lifelong dear friend of my father's, and had been a childhood friend, and knew him very well.
Mhm.
And I found him, and he just told me story after story after story, and then I hung up the phone, and literally, it felt like I lost about 200 pounds. I could almost feel like, lead balls flowing out of the soles of my feet down into the ground, and it was so surreal experience, and I thought, what is going on? And I went, oh, I know where I come from now.
Yeah.
It's hard to know who you are if you don't know who you come from. And I actually come, because I before I came from a caricature, a two-dimensional caricature of a person. And now I actually came from a person, and a person's a story. Mm-hmm. Now, relative to how does this reframing stuff really work, I want to get after that, because in what's going on is we talk about reframing a little more in detail in the second book, but we don't anywhere near exhaust it. And there's a specific technique in reframing that's terribly important that actually isn't in either of the books I want to mention right now, which is the point of called zooming out. Mm-hmm. In a book called Orthodoxy, a guy named G.K. Chesterton, who was back in the 40s was a journalist and a philosopher and an incredibly prolific writer, wrote an interesting book about what does he actually believe himself. He wrote critiques of everybody else, and finally somebody said, "What do you think?" And he writes his own little book called Orthodoxy, which is G.K. Chesterton's point of view. And the second chapter is called The Idiot. And the Idiot chapter is about a man who thinks he's a chicken. And everybody tries to talk the man who thinks it's a chicken out of being a chicken. They point, well, you haven't got any feathers, do you notice that? And here's, and they bring chickens in to say, you don't look like him. But of course, this guy's, just completely bats and nutty. And it turns out he defeats every single argument that everybody makes. Nobody is successful in talking him out of being a chicken. And what Chesterton, now I'm going to modify the way he put it in Dave's language, what Chesterton is saying is, because the problem is not the flaw of his logic, because in his tiny little world, his logic is perfect. Mm-hmm. The problem is his circle is too small. Mm. So in chicken land, he's a chicken all the time and everywhere. Mm-hmm. So in Suicidal land, I am totally trapped. There's no way out. You can't go into that place. I'm the inconsolable contributor to my father's death. If I had done something differently, he wouldn't have killed himself. And I'm inconsolable. So if you're inconsolable contributor to my beloved suicide land trap circle, you're contemplating suicide, I'm in the I will never get out of this circle. Mm-hmm. And you try to solve your problem inside that circle, you will fail. The reframe is the world is bigger than that.
So zoom out.
You have to zoom out. If my father could have imagined that redefining his life another way while still preserving his fatherhood with his children, maybe not his marriage, he could have seen something he couldn't see. Now, as it turns out, I was very productively and very dutifully, but not particularly happily married the first time. So the wife I just lost, so my second wife, we were together 17 years, married 16, and but I was married before that for 24. Mm-hmm. And I've gone to my eldest son, who turns 40 on Sunday. Mm-hmm. And I said, look, as the generations go by, we're supposed to get better. None of us going to get perfect. We're supposed to get it better. When my father was 49 and unhappy, he killed himself. Mm-hmm. When I was 49 and unhappy, I got divorced. When you're 49, you're supposed to have your shit together and just keep going. And correctly, he's on track to do that. Everything looks really good for him being just fine when he hits 49. Now he's not perfect, and I can tell you everything that's wrong with him. But the and the mountain of things that are right with him. But it is slowly getting better. Mm-hmm. You don't have to have it be perfect. You just have to have it be okay. And one of the other big reframes that would help people, which is one of my wife's reframes, she got during her first cancer. She beat cancer once, didn't beat it the second time. 20 years later, she was going in for a procedure, one of these radio opaque imaging things, and the nurse, and what she called a medical euphemism. The nurse says, Now you might feel a little warmth while we inject this stuff. And my wife goes, who's tired of these, moderate phrasings, goes,
Yeah.
oh, you mean a little warmth like when you take a can of kerosene and light it and inject it into my veins? And the nurse goes,
Wow.
oh, you've been through this procedure before, have you? And she said, yes, I have. And I'm tired of your damn euphemisms, and then the nurse goes all hard on her. She goes, oh, well, then you understand. So here's the deal. Look, it's just pain. Okay. Let it rinse through you and then it will be over. Or you can resist it and make it worse and make it last longer.
Yeah, because
It's
it will
up
go
to you.
slower. Yeah.
It's up to you. I'll get paid the same either way. And my wife goes, whoa. So that phrase, it's just pain, let it rinse through you.
Through
It's not,
it. Yeah.
so this is where the reframe is. What most people have is the experience of this intense pain. They go, oh no, I'm in pain. So I've got the pain itself, and that's pretty horrible. And then like, oh no, I'm having pain. I don't want to have pain. Pain is not allowed. Now that's horrible. Oh no, not more pain. Oh no. That now you're going to get to keep it forever. This was like, oh, I notice I'm having pain. This is where your observer, this is what Eckhart Tolle talks about so much in The Power of Now, right?
Yeah, power of now, yeah.
We all have an observer who's transcendent of the situation. The part of you that goes, oh, wow, I really am in pain. Oh, wow, I'm overreacting to this. That little part of you, you're yelling at somebody you care, like, is it really working for you to be yelling at Paula? She's a lovely woman. I mean, what are you yelling at Paula for? That part of us that is sort of outside and looking in. We all have it. And you notice that part of you is not going crazy. That part of you doesn't need to kill you. That part of you isn't in huge pain. And that's the part you can just stand back with. Part of the reframe is, look, it's just an experience I'm having. It's not me. I'm not pain. I'm Dave. Dave's merely in pain. And that permits you to reframe. So, in the grief I'm in over my wife, we were deeply married. I mean, watch what you wish for. We were profoundly married. So the loss is bone crushing. I mean, literally, I'd be walking through the kitchen. I inadvertently see, a picture of her, and it hits me so hard, I'm physically dropped to my knees on the ground, and I hear this noise, which apparently is me wailing. I'm making a noise I've never heard before. It's completely involuntary, and I kind of go, whoa, what's this? And then the reframe is, oh, it's just the other side of love. I'm very fortunate to get to hurt this bit. Not many people do. So this pain is an expression of profound love. I'm learning. I'm in a new stage of my marriage. I'm experiencing my marital love from the other side, and I'm learning a lot about it. It just happens to come at the cost of a tremendous amount of pain. But if I allow it to teach me, I allow it to just rinse through me, there's a lot I can learn from it. There's a lot I can grow up. There's even part of me that can be grateful for it. But you have to accept it, and you have to zoom back from it. So you have to accept, which is not endorse. I do not endorse that we had a deal. She broke the deal. She died 12 years before she was supposed to die. I'm not forgiving her for that, but that's, but she didn't choose it. So it's hugely painful. I don't endorse it for a minute, but I fully accept it. And if I zoom back from it and observe it and participate in it rather than be defined by it, then I can find my way to a new idea. But you can't find the reframed idea, oh, this is just love from the other side, unless you allow yourself to accept and zoom out. So we spent a lot of time on that. But boy, it's, we're the unstuck guys. Designing your life's just a bunch of ideas to get unstuck. And I think your listeners, both those contemplating and those bereaved by suicide, are stuck, and you got to get unstuck. It's thing one.
And I do recommend to read the book and take the class that you can take it online now, but we'll talk about that at the end.
Okay.
We still have like 5 minutes, and I want to cover something that I find
seven. We can go 7 minutes.
We have 7 minutes. Okay. So the one thing that we keep coming back to, Dave, is people and love, right? You talked about your friend who loved you enough to say, you know what, you're in a lot of pain. You have to look into that. Yep. You talked about your wife, about your father, the losses that you've had, and we keep going. And one of the things you talk in the book is gauge love.
Yes.
Because, and my listeners know, for me, the most important thing and the most healing thing you can ever have is a relationship, is connection. We're
Yes.
bound to connect, we're wired to connect. So I wanted to talk about that.
Yes.
How to gauge love. What does that even mean, and how important is it in redesigning your life?
Well, when you talk about the gauge, you're particularly referring to one of the gauges on our life dashboard, and that was really a reframe. So the dysfunctional belief is, oh, I'm stuck with the
Mhm.
work-life balance problem. And anytime you give your mind a dichotomy, just two things, you'll turn it into a zero-sum game, a teeter-totter. Work goes up, life
Mhm.
goes down. Life goes up, work goes down. Well, which one is it? Life or work? Life or work? And we make it a zero-sum game. So most of the things we think of that way aren't zero-sum games. Life's much more complex than that. There are many moving parts,
Mhm.
and one part moving a little bit doesn't require everything else to adjust. I can have some more love in my life, and I don't have to work less.
Mhm.
So we reframe that into a 4-bar dashboard with um, work, health, love, and play as just 4 categories to try to span as much of the human experience as we could, because we were trying to help people not be better professionals or just be better husbands or wives or children. We're
To
having
have
people
better
be
lives.
better
Yeah.
better humans, right? The
Mhm.
technical name of design thinking is actually human-centered design. It's about making life more human, so as fully human as we can be. And so without, we picked 4 because that's pretty broad, but it doesn't cover everything. But too long a list, you can't remember it. So work, love, play, and health. And by far, the center of it is love. Um, and that's all kinds of love, all kinds of relational formats. But we really are, as you mentioned, wired to be together. You and I, we now know, both have a high regard for the work of Dan Siegel, who talks an awful lot about, our collective consciousness. In fact, the separate autonomous self is a profound lie. We are not
Illusion.
separate
It's an
selves.
illusion. Yeah.
It's an illusion. We are absolutely one another. So connection, and connection, particularly through love, is truly what makes the world go around. We are, the human family is much more like an aspen forest. An aspen forest is one plant. They're all joined together at the root, as are we. And so leaning into that is an incredibly important thing.
Mhm.
And people from all walks of life. I mean, from humanist walks of life, from religious walks of life, from wisdom traditions, from positive psychology. I mean, over and over and over again, it comes back to that. The Grant study, the longest running behavioral study ever done. George Valiant, the final project manager, was summarizing these results over 70 years of research. And he said, by the way, you want to understand life? It's real simple. Love, full stop.
Yeah.
So
Is that the Harvard study?
yeah, the Harvard
Yeah,
study.
yeah. I
Yeah,
read that one, and I mean,
and it's
they tried to find other answers, but they just couldn't find. That's as
other
simple as
things
that.
matter, but it all comes back down to that.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, there's a reframe on, and love is really, love is transmitted, if you will, by the connection between us. We want to build connections, and then what flows in that connection is love. And
Mhm.
and this is another place where reframe occurs. Let's say I've lost somebody. I've just lost somebody to whom I was deeply connected. And one thing that really ticked me off after my wife died, we had we're both intense, loud people. She was an incredibly capable woman. We did a lot of things independently. Claudia kept saying, our marriage is one that thrives on lots of fresh air. We need a lot of room. We didn't and so I have a lot of things I do that she didn't do. I mean, motorcycling this, and most of my sailing she was sailed to, but I had a lot of things that were mine and she
Mhm.
wasn't in. So when I lost her, I went, well, fortunately, I've got a bunch of things I've still got. They're the same. I got all that. I just have to rebuild the parts of life that she was in. Thanks for playing, Dave. No, no, no. It's all wrecked. So one day I'm
Yes.
throwing my leg over my motorcycle to go take a motorcycle ride. She didn't ride motorcycles. And I notice it's kind of wrecked. It's kind of ruined.
Yeah,
'Cause,
because you don't have someone to go back to and talk about your
well,
ride.
and I wasn't even sure what the heck it was about Claudia that was ruining that, and I was really mad, like, no, 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 you can't have this. This is mine. You can't have this too. I'm not losing this. I was mad. I was angry, and
Uh-huh.
I figured it out. What it was is the depth of the connection we had was running 24/7, whether I was conscious of it or not. And when I started to do something, and that unconscious connectivity was missing, it's really been
Mm.
transformed because I've sort of had an encounter with her in the afterlife, but that's another story. But
Mhm.
it's not the same. Everything became different. Now, here's the thing: I had a profoundly deep connection to this woman, and a lot of people would tell, like, I mean, like, wow, their marriage is amazing. It was an amazing marriage. We really got it right the second time. Now, it's very easy to lean into that because I've got it all the time. So as soon as I don't have it, I think, oh, I'm alone. I don't have a connection. And I started feeling really disconnected and kind of floating. I sort of felt translucent, felt like I was disappearing. Felt a lot
Wow.
like when I lost my dad, frankly, because that was the connection I lost when my dad died. And I was having a meeting with three of my kids, adult kids, and talking about how things are going, and they got in my face. They go, Dad, you don't have no connection, because what I realized was I wasn't, I've been on someone's mind all the time my entire life. This is the first time in my life that there isn't somebody, my mother or my wife,
Mm-hmm.
on whose mind I am all the time. If I don't come home on time, I'm going to get a phone call. Right now, I drive off a cliff. It'll take 3 days for somebody to know, um, and and that felt horrible. And my kids go, no, 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 you are on our mind. I actually went back and I took an inventory of texts and emails for the past 4 months. And literally the phrase, "Hey, Dave, you're an old friend from New York. You're on my mind this morning. I thought I'd call. How you doing?"
Oh.
I'm on lots of people's mind, but now I'm on their mind episodically or in between. Now the network, the web of connections to a wide number of people that I love. So I'm really fortunate. I have an incredible support network. Is there, and it in fact does show up, and people do reach out, or I can reach them, and they're happy to talk to me. So it's there. It's just different. I want it the way
Mm-hmm.
I used to. I want my wife back. I'd give up all that for my wife back for a minute.
Of
But
course, yeah.
I have to be willing that when you lose something, the immediate reaction to think is, I've lost it all. And if I can't
Mm-hmm.
have that, then it's no good. And
There's nothing left.
there's nothing worthwhile.
Yeah.
And that's not true. So literally now it's a mental exercise. So I'll sit there, and yesterday was her birthday, right? I look out over the ocean and kind of go, there's nobody to say happy birthday to. I guess I'm
Mm-hmm.
all by myself. And I go, nope, not true. And I close my eyes and I image, first of all, my 9 children and their spouses and my 9 grandchildren. That's 18 people right there. And then all my friends and kind of and I scan back over and Amy Lee, who I haven't talked to in 9 months from New York, just sent me, "You're on my mind today. How you doing?" So I kind of go, I know it's true. By an act of faith, I remind myself you have lots of people out there. They're not downstairs, they're not in the kitchen, but that's okay. So
Mm-hmm.
part of it is retraining your mind through the discipline of telling a different story. You've got to tell a different story because all you're looking for is to replace the thing that's irreplaceable. You're doomed. So this
Mm-hmm.
reframe followed by iterate, iterate, iterate. I'm prototyping a new way to think about what connectivity means.
Mm-hmm.
And it's going to
Mm-hmm.
take me a couple of months and a couple of hundred tries to get it right. And then I will have wired a new pathway in my brain and in my soul, and I will be able to experience my connectivity to the world very differently than when I was married to Claudia, but it's not nothing.
And your connectivity with her too, because I invite you to think about. I've said this before on my podcast, that death ends life, but not the relationship. So your relationship is different, of course. You don't have her there, but that doesn't end with her death, right? Like it
No, it
didn't with your father, like it didn't with your father.
no,
You
no, it really
reframed it,
didn't.
and you had a
Yeah.
different, completely different relationship with him after you understood what he went through, right? And
Oh
I'm
yeah.
really glad, Dave, that your sons helped to zoom out and see
Yeah.
that you're not alone. Thank you so much for sharing your stories with us and your knowledge. I'm sure this is going to be so helpful to my audience. And to me, your book was so precious to me. And I'm going, just so you know, I am going to take the class. Please tell
Yes.
my audience, where can they find you?
So if you go, people can take the class. There is a 22 module online video version of our intense workshop. It's really well done. Creative Live. So you go to creativelive.com and just type in designing your life, and there it is. It's on sale now for $29. I mean, it's
Wow.
$29. It's barely the price of the book. It's about 9 hours of material. It's a lifelong license. You can use it forever. It's really well done. So if you want to do the live version, go. And it's Bill and Dave in person. Go for it.
And really go for it, because we have just so broadly talked about so many things but it's very hands-on. They give you
Yeah.
skills, you have to write down things, you have to reflect upon them. So it's something transformational. I can
Yeah. It's
tell
not a
you, I
system. It's
can
really,
guarantee.
It's just a toolkit. You're the expert on your life.
Mm-hmm.
We're just trying to help you get unstuck. We got a whole bunch of tools in there. It's not do thing 1, then 2, then 3, then 4, then 19, and then suddenly, boom, you have an epiphany and life is fine. It's nothing like that. It's like,
No.
here's a bunch of stuff. Here's a crayon box. There's lots of
Mm-hmm.
colors. You pick the colors you need
Mm-hmm.
right now. You start drawing the drawing you need to draw. Do one thing, then do another thing. You got
Mm-hmm.
time. So
And
it's,
using a word that you have in your book, and if it doesn't work for a long time, calibrate it, right?
yep, just do it again.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you, Dave. Have a good day.
You too. Thanks so much, Paula.